The sky was burning. High Matriarch Silene stood at the broken window of the Grand Beacon Tower and watched her world die. Orange flames rose from the eastern cities. Black smoke covered the horizon like a funeral cloth. The Devourer swarm had come, just as it had come for every other civilization in the galaxy. She was old now. Her blue scales had faded to gray over the centuries. She had seen the rise and fall of empires. She had watched the Thren burn. She had heard the last screams of the Oryxen as they fled into the void, never to be heard from again. She had witnessed the mighty Kethrani armada scatter like leaves in a storm. Now it was her turn. Now it was the Velkhari's turn to die. Behind her, the communications room was in chaos. Young officers ran between terminals, their clawed feet clicking against the metal floor. Warning lights flashed red, alarms screamed, but Silene stood still, her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes fixed on the burning sky. "Matriarch," said Commander Thelos, approaching with hesitation. "The underground bunkers report they are at capacity. 12,000 civilians are secured. But the swarm landing parties are breaking through the northern defense line. We have perhaps 6 hours before they reach the capital." 6 hours. 6 hours until her species joined the long list of the dead. "And the fleet?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Thelos lowered his head. "Destroyed, Matriarch. The last carrier fell 20 minutes ago. Captain Vorn's final transmission was, 'Brave.' Brave. They were all brave. The Velkhari had fought with everything they had. Their warriors had died with honor. Their scientists had worked until the very end, trying to find a weakness in the swarm. Their children had been taught to hold their heads high, even as the monsters descended from the stars. But bravery was not enough. It was never enough against the swarm. Silene turned from the window and walked toward the central console. The Grand Beacon was the oldest structure on their world. It had been built 10,000 years ago, when her ancestors first reached for the stars. It had sent messages across the galaxy, connecting the Velkhari to 1,000 other civilizations. Most of those civilizations were dead now. "Open all channels," she said. Thelos looked at her with confusion. "All channels, Matriarch. But many of those frequencies lead to dead space, empty systems, lost colonies." "All channels," she repeated. "Even the forbidden ones. The forbidden channels. The frequencies that reached beyond known space, into the uncharted regions where strange species were rumored to live, where the young race called humanity was said to dwell." Silene remembered the humans. She had been young when they first appeared on the galactic stage, 300 years ago. They were primitive then, loud, aggressive. They had barely learned to travel between stars. The elder races had laughed at them, mocked them, and eventually quarantined them after some diplomatic incident that no one could quite remember anymore. Most believed the humans had destroyed themselves by now. That was what young species did. They burned bright and died fast. But Silene was desperate, and desperate people call out to anyone who might listen. "The channel is open, Matriarch," said a young technician, her voice shaking, "broadcasting on all frequencies." Silene stepped forward and spoke into the transmitter. Her voice was calm, but her hearts were pounding in her chest. "To any who hear this message, this is High Matriarch Silene of the Velkhari sovereignty. Our world is under attack. The Devourer swarm has come for us, as it has come for so many others. Our fleet is destroyed. Our defenses are falling. We are the last." She paused, her throat tight with emotion. "The Great Alliance is broken. The Thren are consumed. The Oryxen are gone. The Kethrani are scattered. We have no one left to call. But I am calling anyway. I am calling into the void, hoping that someone, somewhere, still lives. Hoping that someone still cares." She closed her eyes. If there is anyone left in the stars, please, help us. We cannot survive alone. The transmission ended. Silence filled the room. Thelos shook his head slowly. Matriarch, with respect, no one will answer. The galaxy is empty. We are alone. Perhaps, Silene said, but I had to try. She turned back to the window. The fires were spreading. The swarm's organic ships circled overhead, like vultures waiting for their meal. In a few hours, her people would be nothing but food for the hive. She had made peace with death long ago, but she wished more than anything that her people could have lived. The minutes passed. 10, 15. The officers worked in grim silence, preparing final defense plans that everyone knew would fail. Mothers in the bunkers held their children close. Warriors checked their weapons one last time. Priests offered final prayers to gods who seemed to have abandoned them. Then the communication console beeped. Everyone froze. That is an incoming transmission, the technician stammered. From the outer rim, She checked the coordinates 3 times before she spoke again. From human space. Silene moved faster than she had moved in decades. She grabbed the console, her claws digging into the metal. Play it, she commanded. The speakers crackled with static. Then a voice came through. Strange, speaking in broken galactic common with a heavy accent that Silene had never heard before. Velkari Matriarch, this is Admiral Josiah Mercer of the United Terran Accord. We have received your transmission. A pause, static. Then, hold your position, do not surrender, do not lose hope. Another pause. When the voice returned, it carried something that Silene had not heard in a very long time. Something that sounded almost like a promise. We are coming. The transmission ended. The room was silent. Fellows stared at the console as if it had grown teeth. The young technician had tears running down her face. Silene herself could not move, could not breathe. The humans, the primitives, the forgotten species that the galaxy had abandoned 3 centuries ago. They had answered. How is this possible? Thelos whispered. The humans were nothing. They had barely a dozen ships when we last heard of them. What could they possibly do against the swarm? Silene did not answer. She was looking at the burning sky, but for the first time in months, she felt something other than despair. She did not know what was coming. She did not know if these humans could truly help, or if they were flying to their deaths. But someone had heard her cry. Someone had answered. And in that moment, that was enough. Tell the bunkers, she said quietly. Tell them that help is coming. Tell them to hold on. Thelos hesitated. But Matriarch, we do not know if the humans can. Tell them, Silene repeated. Hope is all we have left. Let us not waste it. Outside, the swarm continued its advance. The sky continued to burn. Death crept closer with every passing minute. But somewhere in the stars, ships were moving. Engines were firing. Soldiers were preparing for war. 300 years ago, humanity had been a joke. Admiral Josiah Mercer remembered the stories his grandfather used to tell. Stories of the first contact, when human ships met alien vessels for the first time. Stories of wonder and excitement and hope. Humanity had thought they were joining a family. They thought the galaxy would welcome them with open arms. They were wrong. The elder races looked at humans the way adults look at noisy children. The Velkari called them crude. The Thran called them violent. The Kethrani refused to speak to them at all. Humanity was given a small corner of space and told to stay there. They were denied access to trade routes. They were locked out of the Galactic Council. They were forgotten. And then came the quarantine. Some diplomatic incident, they said. Some mistake a human ambassador made. The details were lost to history. But the result was clear. Humanity was cut off from the galaxy entirely. No trade, no communication, no contact. The elder races expected humans to wither and die, to destroy themselves with their wars and their weapons, to fade away like so many young species before them. But humanity did not die. Humanity got angry. Mercer stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, the flagship of the first expeditionary fleet. He was 73 years old. His hair was white. His face was lined with scars from battles most people had never heard of. He had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. "Admiral," said Captain Chen, his second-in-command, "the fleet is assembled. 3,200 ships, all armed, all ready." 3,000 ships. That was more than the entire Valkyrie navy at its height, more than the Kethrani armada that had once been called invincible, more than any force the galaxy had seen in 10,000 years. And the galaxy had no idea it existed. After the quarantine, humanity had turned inward. They stopped asking for permission. They stopped begging for scraps from the elder races. Instead, they took every piece of alien technology they had acquired, and they studied it. They improved it. They made it their own. Human scientists worked for generations, passing knowledge from parent to child. Human engineers built shipyards hidden in asteroid fields and gas giants. Human soldiers trained in conditions that would have killed most alien species. The elder races thought humans were primitive. They never bothered to check. "Show me the Valkyrie system," Mercer commanded. The main screen flickered, and a holographic map appeared. The Valkyrie homeworld was marked in blue. Around it, like a swarm of insects, were millions of red dots. "The Devourer swarm," Chen said quietly. "Estimates suggest between 8 and 12 million individual organisms, plus roughly 200,000 organic warships." He had been studying the swarm for 40 years. He knew their tactics, their biology, their weaknesses. He knew how they had consumed the Thren in 17 days. He knew how they had broken the Kethrani fleet in 3 hours. He also knew something the swarm did not expect. Humans had been preparing for this war since before it started. "The swarm thinks it is fighting another soft species," Mercer said. "Another civilization that will break and run. Another meal." He turned to face his crew. They were young, most of them. Young and fierce and ready to fight. They had grown up on stories of humanity's exile. They had trained their entire lives for the day when they would show the galaxy what humans could do. "The swarm is wrong," Mercer continued. "We are not the Thren. We are not the Erixon. We do not surrender. We do not retreat. We do not die quietly." He walked across the bridge, his boots heavy on the metal floor. 300 years ago, the galaxy threw us away. They called us primitives. They locked us in a cage and expected us to rot. But we did not rot. We grew stronger. We built this fleet. We forged these weapons. We became something the galaxy has never seen before. He stopped at the center of the bridge and looked at the screen showing the Valkyrie world. "Now someone has called for help. Someone is facing extinction, just like we almost did. Someone needs us." His voice hardened. "And we will answer, not because we owe the galaxy anything, not because we want their thanks, but because this is who we are. We are humanity. We do not leave people behind. We do not ignore cries for help. We do not let monsters win." He raised his hand and pointed at the map. "The swarm has never faced an enemy like us. They have never fought a species that refuses to break. They have never met humans." A grim smile crossed his face. "Let's introduce ourselves." The bridge erupted in cheers. Officers shouted and stamped their feet. The sound echoed through the ship, spreading to other vessels through the communication channels. 3,000 ships roared their approval. Chen stepped forward, her eyes shining. "Admiral, the hyperspace coordinates are locked. All ships report ready for jump." Mercer nodded. "Then let us begin." He turned to the communications officer. "Open a channel to all ships." The channel opened with a soft click. This is Admiral Mercer to all vessels of the 1st Expeditionary Fleet. In a few minutes, we will jump to the Velkari system. We will face an enemy that has destroyed civilizations. We will fight a battle that many of us will not survive." He paused. "The galaxy forgot us. They left us to rot in our corner of space. They mocked us and dismissed us and expected us to disappear. But we never forgot them. We never stopped watching. We knew that someday, someone would need our help." His voice dropped lower. "Today is that day. Today we show the galaxy what humanity has become. Today we fight not for glory, not for conquest, but for something simpler, because someone asked for help, and we are the only ones left who can answer." He straightened his back. "Remember why we fight. Remember what we protect. Remember who we are." He took a breath. "All ships, engage hyperspace drives. We have a war to win." Across the fleet, engines roared to life. Space itself seemed to bend and twist as 3,000 vessels prepared to tear holes in reality. Officers said quiet prayers. Soldiers checked their weapons one last time. Pilots gripped their controls with steady hands. And then, in a flash of light that would have blinded anyone watching, the entire fleet vanished. Humanity was going to war. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. The swarm certainly did not expect it. The Velkari barely dared to hope. But somewhere in the cold void between stars, 3,000 ships full of angry, determined humans were racing toward a fight that would change everything. Mercer sat in his command chair and watched the swirling lights of hyperspace pass by the windows. He thought of his grandfather, who had dreamed of a day when humanity would stand tall among the stars. He thought of the billions of humans who had lived and died in exile, never knowing if their sacrifices would matter. He thought of the Velkari child who might be hiding in a bunker right now, wondering if anyone would save her. "We are coming," he said quietly, to no one in particular. "We are coming." The lights of hyperspace swirled and danced, and the fleet flew on. The swarm had won. It always won. The Overmind, the ancient intelligence that controlled billions of organisms across the galaxy, watched its forces descend upon the Velkari homeworld. This was the natural order of things. The strong consumed the weak. The many devoured the few. Species rose and fell like waves upon a shore, and the swarm was the eternal tide. 8 million organisms swarmed above the planet. 200,000 organic warships blocked out the stars. Carrier beasts the size of mountains released endless streams of warriors. Acid ships prepared to melt cities. Digestion vessels waited hungrily for the feast to begin. On the surface, the Velkari had retreated to their last stronghold. The capital city stood alone, surrounded by flames and ruin. Anti-air cannons fired desperately into the sky, destroying dozens of creatures for every one that landed. But there were always more. There were always more. High Matriarch Silene stood in the command bunker beneath the grand beacon. Screens showed her the horror unfolding above. The swarm was not rushing. It was savoring the moment, letting the fear build, letting the prey understand how helpless they were. "Matriarch," said Commander Thelos, his voice hollow. "The human fleet. Perhaps they lied. Perhaps they cannot come. Perhaps they said they would come," Silene interrupted. "I believe them." She did not know why she believed. She had no reason to trust these humans. She had never met one. Everything she knew about them suggested they were weak, primitive, barely civilized. But something in that voice on the transmission had touched her. Something real. Something true. 5 hours since transmission, the technician reported. No sign of any vessels approaching the system. The swarm's main force began its final descent. Millions of creatures darkened the sky like a living cloud. The anti-air cannons fell silent one by one, overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Warriors landed on the outskirts of the capital, their claws tearing into buildings, their jaws searching for flesh. In the bunkers, mothers held their children and whispered prayers. Warriors prepared for their final stand. Priests blessed the dying. Everywhere, the Velkhari faced their end with what dignity they could manage. Silene closed her eyes. She had done everything she could. She had called for help, she had held on. But perhaps the galaxy was truly empty. Perhaps humanity was a myth. Perhaps the scanner screamed. "Matriarch," the technician shouted. "Hyperspace signatures. Massive hyperspace signatures." Silene's eyes snapped open. Where? Everywhere, forming at the edge of the system. Hundreds of them. Thousands. The main screen flickered, switching to a view of open space. And what Silene saw there made her heart stop. Space was tearing open. Great rifts of light split the darkness, each one larger than a Velkhari cruiser. They appeared in waves, in clusters, in formations so precise they seemed choreographed. And from each rift emerged ships. Human ships. They were unlike anything Silene had ever seen. Angular and brutal, built for war without beauty or elegance. Their hulls were thick with armor. Their surfaces bristled with weapons. They flew in perfect formation, thousands of vessels moving as one, spreading across the system like an avalanche of metal. "By the ancient stars," Thelos whispered, there are thousands of them." 3,200 ships emerged from hyperspace in the span of 4 minutes. Carriers the size of cities, battleships covered in gun turrets, destroyers sleek as knives, frigates swarming like angry insects, and at the center of it all, one massive vessel, larger than all the others, its hull painted with a symbol that meant nothing to Silene, but clearly meant everything to the humans aboard. A flag, a planet, a word, Earth. The transmission crackled to life. "Velkhari Matriarch, this is Admiral Josiah Mercer of the United Terran Accord 1st Expeditionary Fleet. Apologies for the delay. Traffic was terrible." Silene blinked. Was that humor? At a time like this? "Your civilians," Mercer continued, his voice calm and steady. "Move them to the northern continent. Our ground forces will establish a defensive line there. As for the swarm—" A pause. "We will handle the swarm." Silene found her voice. "Admiral, the swarm numbers in the millions. They have destroyed fleets far larger than—" "Matriarch," Mercer interrupted gently. "With respect, those fleets were not us." The transmission ended, and then the humans attacked. The swarm had never hesitated. It had fought 1,000 battles across 1,000 worlds. It had consumed species that were ancient when the Velkhari were still swimming in seas. It knew no fear. But for the first time in its eternal existence, the Overmind felt something like confusion. The human ships did not move like any vessels it had seen before. They did not form defensive lines. They did not retreat to safe distances. They charged directly into the heart of the swarm fleet, their weapons blazing. And those weapons were nightmares. Kinetic accelerators fired metal rods at impossible speeds, punching through organic hulls like needles through paper. Plasma lances carved burning lines through formations of swarm ships. Nuclear missiles detonated in cascading chains, each explosion triggering the next. Laser batteries swept back and forth, slicing creatures apart. The swarm died in thousands, tens of thousands. It threw its forces at the human fleet, expecting the same result it always achieved: attrition, exhaustion, defeat. But the humans did not break. Their ships took damage, some exploded, crews died, but the fleet kept pushing forward. Damaged vessels did not retreat. They accelerated, ramming into enemy ships, taking as many swarm creatures with them as possible. Escape pods launched soldiers who continued fighting even as their ships burned around them. The Overmind had seen many species fight. It had seen brave warriors and clever strategists, and desperate defenders. But it had never seen this. These humans were not just fighting. They were enjoying it. Open communications channels picked up human voices. They were shouting, laughing, playing music. They had given names to their missiles. They were competing to see who could destroy the most enemies. They were making jokes while their friends died beside them. The swarm did not understand. On the surface, the Velkari watched in shock as the sky battle raged. Human dropships began descending through the chaos, armored shuttles packed with soldiers in powered suits. They landed around the capital, forming defensive perimeters, their weapons cutting down any swarm creature that approached. A human soldier, her face hidden behind a black visor, approached Silene's bunker. She was huge by Velkari standards, easily twice the mass of an average warrior. Her armor was scorched and dented. A swarm claw had left deep scratches across her chestplate. "Matriarch Silene?" the soldier asked, her voice distorted by her helmet speakers. "Yes," Silene managed. "Sergeant Elena Vance, Terran Marine Corps. The Admiral sends his regards. We're establishing evacuation routes for your civilians. If you could direct your people to follow our guidance, we'll get them to safety." Silene stared at her. "Why?" The soldier tilted her head. "Why what? Why did you come? The galaxy abandoned you. We ignored your people for centuries. Why would you risk your lives for us?" Sergeant Vance was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer. "My grandmother used to tell me a story. When humanity first reached for the stars, we dreamed of finding friends. We dreamed of a galaxy full of wonder and cooperation. We found something different." She looked up at the sky, where human ships were dying by the dozens to protect a world that had never shown humanity any kindness. But just because the galaxy wasn't what we hoped, doesn't mean we have to become cold. We remember what we dreamed of being, and we try to be that. Even when it hurts. She turned back to Silene. "You called for help. We answered. That is all that matters." Above them, the battle raged on. The swarm adapted, concentrated its forces, brought its heaviest weapons to bear. Human ships burned and broke and fell. But still they fought, because someone had asked for help, and humanity had come. The Overmind had lived for 1,000,000 years. It had been born in the darkness between stars, a single cell floating in the void. It had grown, consumed, evolved. It had devoured its first species before humanity's ancestors had climbed down from trees. It had destroyed civilizations that built wonders the galaxy would never see again. It was ancient. It was eternal. It was inevitable. And now, for the first time, it was afraid. The battle had been raging for 7 hours. The swarm had lost over 1,000,000 organisms. 40,000 ships had been destroyed. The human fleet had suffered terrible losses too, nearly a third of its vessels burning in the darkness of space. But unlike every enemy the Overmind had faced before, the humans showed no signs of breaking. They were pushing forward, toward the Hivemind flagship. The flagship was the heart of the swarm, a moon-sized organic construct that served as the Overmind's central body. From here, it coordinated billions of organisms across the galaxy. If the flagship fell, the swarm would lose its central intelligence. It would become mindless, fractured, weak. The Overmind had never worried about this before. No enemy had ever come close to the flagship. The very idea was absurd. But now, through its countless eyes, it watched human ships forming in attack formation. A massive carrier at the center, surrounded by battleships and cruisers. They were burning hard, ignoring the swarm forces trying to stop them, focused on one target. "All vessels, this is Admiral Mercer," a voice crackled across swarm-intercepted communications. The flagship is our target. Everything else is secondary. I need a path cleared, and I need it now. The swarm threw everything it had at the approaching fleet. Acid ships sprayed their contents across human hulls. Ramming creatures slammed into engines. Warriors launched themselves through space, clawing at armor plates. For every human ship that advanced, 2 more died. But the humans kept coming. The carrier that led the charge, a massive vessel called the Prometheus, absorbed hit after hit. Its armor melted, its weapons failed, its engines sputtered. A lesser ship would have retreated hours ago. The Prometheus accelerated. Prometheus, this is Admiral Mercer. Your hull integrity is critical. Fall back. Negative, Admiral, came the reply. Captain Rodriguez's voice was calm, despite the chaos around her. We can still make the gap, just a little further. Captain, you will not survive. No, sir, but the Marines will. The Prometheus drove forward, using its burning body as a shield. Behind it, a dozen dropships launched, racing toward the flagship. The swarm tried to intercept them, but the Prometheus's remaining guns provided cover fire until the very end. When the carrier finally exploded, it took 100 swarm ships with it, and 12 dropships reached the flagship. Sergeant Elena Vance was in the first dropship to breach the hull. The interior of the flagship was a nightmare. Walls of flesh pulsed with alien life. The floor was soft and warm, like walking on living tissue. Strange fluids dripped from organic pipes. The air was thick with smells that made human stomachs churn. None of this mattered to the Terran Marines. "Forward!" Vance shouted, her rifle blazing. "We stop when we reach the core or when we're dead. Nothing else counts." 500 Marines had landed. They fought through corridors filled with warrior creatures. They blasted through walls of defensive tissue. They lost soldiers at every turn. But they never stopped advancing. The Overmind watched through the eyes of its defenders. It had consumed thousands of species. It had tasted the fear of countless warriors as they faced their deaths. But these humans were different. They were not afraid. A group of Marines was surrounded, cut off from the main force. Instead of surrendering, they triggered their explosives, taking dozens of swarm creatures with them. Another squad, out of ammunition, charged the enemy with knives and bare hands. A wounded soldier, unable to walk, propped himself against a wall and provided cover fire until his last breath. The Overmind did not understand. These creatures were dying. Their mission was almost certainly impossible. Why did they not break? It reached into their minds, trying to understand. And what it found there shocked it. These humans were not fighting for victory. They were not even fighting to survive. They were fighting out of spite, out of rage, out of a deep, burning refusal to let evil win, even if they died in the process. They knew they might not make it. They did not care. "Keep moving," Vance commanded, stepping over the bodies of fallen comrades. "We're almost there." The core chamber was close. The Overmind could feel the humans approaching. It threw its strongest defenders at them. Massive warrior creatures, evolved over millions of years to be perfect killing machines. The Marines faced them without hesitation. Private Shen, a young man barely 20 years old, was grabbed by a creature twice his size. Instead of screaming, he laughed and shoved a grenade into the creature's mouth. Lieutenant Parker held a corridor, alone for 4 minutes, allowing her squad to advance before she was finally overwhelmed. Sergeant Davis, his arm torn off, kept firing his rifle with his remaining hand until blood loss took him. One by one, the Marines fell, but they sold their lives dearly. Vance and 17 survivors reached the core chamber. It was a vast space, filled with pulsing organic structures that connected the Overmind to its billions of children across the galaxy. At the center was the neural cluster, the physical brain of the ancient intelligence. "Set the charges," Vance ordered. "All of them." The Marines moved quickly. They planted explosive devices on every surface, enough firepower to crack a small moon. As they worked, the walls around them came alive with swarm defenders. The final battle began. A Valkyrie observer, one of the soldiers who had joined the human assault, watched in amazement. He had never seen anything like these humans. They were not elegant fighters. They were not graceful or beautiful. They were brutal, efficient, and absolutely relentless. "How do you do it?" he asked Vance as she fought beside him. "How do you keep fighting when you know you will die?" Vance shot a creature that was lunging at him, then turned to face another. "Because every one of us who falls here means someone's kid gets to grow up safe," she said. "My grandmother survived a war. My mother survived a plague. My father died defending a colony. They all gave everything so that I could exist. Now it's my turn." She slammed a new magazine into her rifle. "That math always works out, friend. Always." The charges were set. The Marines had lost all but 7 of their number. The swarm was closing in from every direction. "All units fall back to extraction point," Vance commanded. "We have 3 minutes." They ran, through corridors that twisted and changed around them, past hordes of screaming creatures, through walls of flesh that tried to trap them. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs failed, and then they kept running. 4 Marines made it to the dropship. Vance was one of them. As the ship launched, she looked back at the flagship. Her friends were still in there. Chen, Parker, Davis, all of them. "Detonation in 30 seconds, the pilot reported. Vance closed her eyes. "Make it count," she whispered. The charges exploded. The flagship cracked like an egg. Fire bloomed from 1,000 wounds in its organic hull. The neural cluster, the ancient brain of the Overmind, was vaporized in an instant. Across the galaxy, billions of swarm organisms suddenly lost their connection to the central intelligence. They stopped, mid-attack. They stumbled. They became confused, directionless, mindless. The Overmind was dead. The swarm fleet around the Valkyrie world fell into chaos. Ships collided. Creatures attacked each other. Warriors, on the ground, stood frozen, waiting for orders that would never come. And the human fleet, battered and bleeding but unbroken, turned its guns on the helpless enemy. "All vessels," Admiral Mercer's voice echoed across every channel. "Finish them." The swarm died, not in a great battle, but in a massacre. The creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years were cut down like weeds. It was brutal. It was efficient. It was over. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Mercer slumped in his chair. 843 ships lost. Over 40,000 humans dead. Friends, colleagues, family. But the Valkyrie were safe, and the swarm would never threaten anyone again. "Sir," Captain Chen said softly, "Sergeant Vance's dropship has landed. She's requesting permission to report." Mercer nodded. "Granted." A moment later, Vance's voice came through the speakers. She sounded exhausted, broken, alive. "Admiral, the flagship is destroyed. The Overmind is dead. Mission complete." Mercer closed his eyes. "Well done, Sergeant. Well done." Outside, the Valkyrie sun rose over a world that had nearly died, but still lived. The tide had turned. The fires burned for 3 days. Not the fires of war, but the fires of cleansing. Across the Valkyrie homeworld, human and Valkyrie soldiers worked together to destroy the remains of the swarm. Dead creatures were gathered and burned. Infected areas were purified. Bodies were recovered and honored, both alien and human. High Matriarch Silene walked through the ruins of her capital city. Once, these streets had been filled with life, markets and temples and homes. Now, only rubble remained. But through that rubble, she could see something she had not expected. Hope. Valkyrie civilians emerged from their bunkers, blinking in the sunlight. Children who had been born underground took their first steps on the surface. Parents who had prepared to die instead prepared to rebuild. And everywhere, standing guard, watching over the survivors with patient vigilance, were humans. They looked strange, these humans. Too soft, too small, and yet, they had done what no other species could do. They had stopped the swarm. Silene found Admiral Mercer near the ruins of the Grand Beacon. He was sitting on a broken pillar, staring at the horizon. He looked exhausted. His uniform was dusty and torn. A bandage covered a wound on his forehead. She approached slowly, unsure what to say. "Admiral." Mercer looked up. Despite everything, he smiled. It was a tired smile, but genuine. "Matriarch, good to see you alive." Silene sat beside him. For a long moment, neither spoke. They watched as repair crews began clearing debris from the streets. Human engineers were helping Valkyrie workers set up temporary shelters. Somewhere in the distance, a child was laughing. "I have been trying to understand," Silene said finally. "Why you came? What you gained from this?" Mercer shrugged. "Nothing, really." "Nothing? We didn't come for payment or territory or alliance agreements. We just came because you needed help." Silene shook her head. "That is not how the galaxy works. No one does anything without expecting something in return. Maybe that's why the galaxy needed us." He turned to look at her, his eyes serious. 300 years ago, your people and others like them told us we weren't good enough. Too primitive, too violent, too young. You locked us away and forgot about us." Silene lowered her head in shame. I am sorry for what our ancestors—" "Don't be," Mercer interrupted gently. "I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty. I'm saying it because it's important to understand." He looked back at the horizon. "We could have become bitter. We could have spent 3 centuries building a fleet to take revenge on the galaxy that rejected us. We could have watched the swarm destroy everyone, and then picked through the remains. Why didn't you? Because that's not who we want to be." Mercer's voice was quiet, but firm. "My grandfather used to say that the measure of a species isn't how they treat their friends. It's how they treat those who have wronged them. Anyone can be kind to those who are kind to them. The real test is whether you can be kind to those who weren't." He stood up slowly, groaning as old wounds protested. "The galaxy wasn't kind to us, but we decided that didn't give us permission to be cruel. We could be better. We could be the neighbors we wished we'd had." Silene stood too. She looked at this strange, soft, impossible creature who had traveled across the galaxy to save her people. 800 ships, she said. 40,000 soldiers. You sacrificed so much for us." "They knew what they were fighting for," Mercer replied. "Every one of them volunteered. Every one of them understood the risks. And every one of them believed it was worth it." "How can you be so certain?" Mercer smiled sadly. "Because I would have done the same. Because any of us would have. That's what it means to be human, Matriarch. We fight for each other, even when the odds are impossible. Even when it costs everything." A week later, the galaxy began to change. Word spread across the stars about what had happened at the Valkyrie homeworld. The species that had hidden in fear emerged from their refuges. The survivors of the Thren, small colonies that had escaped the initial destruction, made contact again. The scattered Kethrani began to regroup, and all of them asked the same question. Who were these humans who had stopped the swarm? A new galactic council formed, not like the old one, which had been built on hierarchy and exclusion. This one was built on something different, something the humans had brought with them: trust. For the first time in galactic history, humanity was offered a seat at the table, not as primitives to be tolerated, but as equals, as saviors, as friends. Admiral Mercer was asked to accept the title of Galactic Protector, a position of honor and authority that had never existed before. Species across the galaxy wanted humanity to lead them, to protect them, to guide them forward. Mercer declined. He stood before the assembled representatives of a dozen species, in a great hall built on what had once been a swarm breeding world, and he shook his head. "We didn't come here for glory," he said. "We didn't fight so that humanity could rule the galaxy. We fought because someone was in trouble and no one else could help." He looked around the room at the faces of beings he had never met before, species his ancestors had only dreamed of encountering. "If you want to honor us by remembering why we came. Remember that when the darkness falls, you don't have to face it alone. Remember that there is always someone willing to help, if you're willing to ask. Remember that the galaxy is better when we stand together." He paused. "And remember that someday, another species will call for help. When that day comes, answer them, just like we answered you." The hall was silent. Then, one by one, the representatives stood. They placed their hands over their hearts, or their equivalent organs, in a gesture of respect that transcended species. Humanity had shown the galaxy something it had forgotten, something precious, something worth preserving. Leaders returned to their worlds. Ships flew back to distant stars, and slowly the galaxy began to heal. On the Velkari homeworld, a young girl named Kira walked with her mother through the rebuilding capital. She was 7 years old, born just before the swarm came. She had spent most of her life in underground bunkers, hiding from monsters. Now she walked in the sunlight, watching humans and Velkari work side by side. She saw human children playing with Velkari children, their laughter mixing together like music. "Mother," Kira said, tugging at her parents' robes, "who are those strange creatures, the ones with the soft skin?" Her mother looked down at her, smiling. "They are humans, little one. Why are they here?" "Because we called for help, and they came." Kira thought about this for a moment. Will they always come when someone needs help? Her mother knelt down to meet her eyes. "That is who they are. They are humans, and they do not abandon those who ask for their aid." Kira looked up at the sky. Somewhere beyond those stars, on a distant world called Earth, more humans lived. More of these strange, soft, incredible beings who had crossed the galaxy to save people they had never met. She smiled. "I like them," she decided. Her mother laughed and hugged her tight. Above them, the sun rose on a new day, the first day of a new age, an age where the galaxy was not ruled by fear, but by hope, an age where species worked together instead of hiding alone, an age born from fire and sacrifice and an impossible act of kindness, all because someone had called for help, and humanity had answered. Far across the galaxy, on the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Josiah Mercer stood at the window and watched the stars. The fleet was returning home. 3,000 ships had left. Just over 2,000 were coming back. Every light in the sky represented someone who had not made it, someone who would never see Earth again. But they had not died in vain. Mercer raised a glass of something dark and strong, a toast to the fallen. "You did good," he said quietly. "You all did good." He drank, put down the glass, and turned back to his duties. There was still work to do. There was always work to do. But for now, the galaxy was a little safer, a little kinder, a little more like the dream humanity had carried in its heart for so long. And that was enough.